Hello and welcome to Station 94, our headquarters station. I'm Firefighter Allwine, and it's summertime. And to celebrate summer, which is also fair season, today we're going to be making our favorite fair food. Follow me into the kitchen. Wha-bam! That's a good point. You rolling? Okay, here we go. Should I be wearing gloves for this? Probably should. Oh, too dark. Welcome to the kitchen. So from my childhood, I remember going to the Puyallup Fair every year, and one of my favorite things there was those scones you could get at what are they, the Fisher scones? And I remember the really nice sweet biscuits. They had nice fresh berry jam, and so I'm going to attempt to sort of create my own version of that. So to start out, I'm going to do a really simple berry jam. I'm not going to use pectin, sugar, anything. I'm just going to melt some raspberries down on the stove. Really briefly to keep them nice and fresh. And those will go perfect with our biscuits. With this berry jam, I'm not trying to make a super heavy, thick, pectin-based jam. For this, I think the best thing to do is just to really quickly cook the berries till they drop some of their juice. Once they do that, I'll pull them off the heat and cool them as quick as I can so they kind of retain a lot of their natural texture and flavor. We don't want to go for an overly sweet, sticky thing with these biscuits. So that's what I'm going for right there. A lot of the berries are still, some of them are whole still. But I don't want to break them down completely. That's all I'm going for right there. All right, so for these scones, biscuits, the two things are awfully similar. Scone is just a slightly more dense biscuit, and I prefer a less dense biscuit. So that's what we're making here is biscuits. So I'll start with about 2 cups of flour. I like just a little bit of sugar, and so I'll be using a little bit of brown sugar. I've got maybe a 1/4 cup. Okay, just a tiny bit of salt, about a 1/2 teaspoon. Baking powder, a couple teaspoons. Okay. And that's our dry mix. I want to break up the chunks of sugar, get this kind of homogeneous here. Okay. So now what I'll do is I'll take about 3/4 of a cup of cold butter, and you can dice these up really small with a knife. I prefer to use the cheese grater. Just got to be careful to not grate your knuckles while you're doing this. Okay, so I prefer to cut the butter in just with my hands. You can use, there's cutting tools, you can use a fork, you can use a mixer, whatever. I like just to do it by hand, so. And what I'm going for is to break up the butter into little chunks about the size of peas. All right, there you go. Most of the big chunks of butter have been broken down. It's still going to be pretty kind of shaggy at this point, but that's right where I want it. I'm going to start by adding just a tiny bit of cold water, and I'm adding just enough to where it starts to come together. Okay, so once the dough kind of starts to come together, I'm going to turn it out onto a lightly floured counter. And the key at this point is to mix it and kind of knead it just enough to where it becomes cohesive. Too much and it'll become pretty tough. If it gets a little too sticky, just use a little bit more flour on your hands and on the counter. If it's not coming together, you might need a little bit more liquid. And what kind of happens here is those little pieces of butter get flattened out and form nice flaky layers throughout. All right, and you can kind of shape and cut these however you want. I kind of like a square or kind of triangular shape myself, but you can cut these out round or whatever you feel like. So you can kind of see, since we didn't over mix this too much, you can see in there it's kind of it's layered, laminated, almost like a croissant or something would be. And what that'll do when we bake these is those will be little pockets where some steam will cause that to rise and puff up, and we'll have a really nice flaky result at the end. If you have little scrappy pieces at the end, no problem. Just form them into a little chunk, and that can be the chef's portion right there. So I'm going to put these in the fridge. It's not a bad idea to let this kind of rest and cool off while your oven preheats. Normally with baking, you want to preheat as you're doing all the work, but for these, they benefit from a little bit of a chill for a few minutes before you bake. All right, it's been about 15 minutes. The oven is preheated and these have had an opportunity to cool off a little bit. I'm gonna throw them in the oven. The oven is at 425. I'm gonna put these on the top shelf. The reason being is if you go on the bottom, most ovens will cook from the bottom up, and I don't want the bottoms to scorch. So I'll start them on the top, and I'm gonna set a timer for about 7 minutes, at which point I'm gonna come back and check them, and we'll rotate and finish baking. At the 8-minute mark, I came in and rotated the biscuits. I set a timer for another 7 minutes, so it's been a total of 15 minutes, and they are ready to go. So golden brown, flaky, and I can tell already the bottom is browning a little bit faster, so I'm going to get them off this baking sheet right away, but otherwise they're looking great. All right, so our biscuits have cooled down a little bit. Our jam has cooled down and set up a little bit. So we're going to finish this off with a little bit of soft butter, and you can split these in half or just keep them whole, whatever you want to do. But I like to open them up like that. So there you go, there's my version of the fair scones. For me, for fair food, I think finger food, I think summertime produce, and to me, grilled corn is a perfect example of that. Mexican street corn is definitely our favorite at the station I work at, and I'll make my own kind of version of it with chipotle crema and cotija and cilantro. But to get us started here, I'm going to cook the corn just by leaving it in the husk and grilling it on low heat for about 15 minutes total. Every few minutes I'll rotate them to cook them evenly, and the husk should insulate the kernels perfectly to where in 10 to 15 they should be perfectly cooked. For our street corn, we're going to need to prep two things. One is a chipotle crema, and the other is a cotija cilantro mixture. They're both super simple to prepare. All right, so I do half mayonnaise, half sour cream. And you can do, if you don't like mayonnaise, a lot of people don't, you can do all sour cream, that's fine. Okay, to that I'm going to add juice from about half a lime. And this is purely to taste, however much lime you like. And canned chipotle works great. Just chop it up, add as much as you like. I'm going to add about, gosh, I don't know, quarter cup. And chop this up pretty well, because if you leave a big chunk in there and someone gets, if you surprise someone with a big chunk of chipotle, they might not appreciate that. All right, there you go. There's your chipotle crema. Okay, for our, so you can keep these two things separate. I know some people don't like cilantro, so you can keep these totally separate. I like them both, and I find it a little easier to combine the two, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to crumble my cotija, chop up my cilantro, and mix them together in a big bowl here, so they're ready for me after the corn is grilled. I like to use a fork to crumble the cotija. So cotija and queso fresco look very similar. They're often right next to each other at the store. Big difference is queso fresco is a little softer, a little sweeter. The cotija is going to be a little saltier and a little bit drier. So you can experiment with both if you're doing this recipe. Because the corn is so sweet, I think the salty cotija works a little nicer, but they're both great cheeses to use in a lot of different recipes. So there you go, crumbled up cotija. Now I'll chop up my cilantro. It's always good to take a look at your herbs, make sure there's no wilted or dirty ones in there. This is looking really great. So, and I'm going pretty fine with this so that it'll kind of coat the corn pretty well. Big pieces of leaves are not going to stick as well. So. It's been about 15 minutes. I rotated the corn every 3 or 4 minutes, and they're done now. You can see the husks charred a little bit, but nothing crazy, nothing we're worried about. So at this point, I put gloves on because this corn's gonna be pretty hot. I just peel back the skin, and then it kind of becomes the handle for this, just like that. Okay, so I'll do that with all 4 of these. And what I'm gonna do next here is I'm gonna kind of slather that chipotle crema on the corn, and then I'll use that to adhere the cotija and cilantro to the outside. There you go, I'll do the rest of them. When I think fair food, fried finger food definitely comes to mind. One of my favorite fried dishes is fried mac and cheese. So what we've got is we've got some leftover mac and cheese here. If it is solid enough just to either scoop it out or cut it into chunks, that's ideal. This one's a little softer, so we're going to have to sort of mold it up to get them cohesive. The breading process is form up the mac and cheese, throw it into some flour. I've got a couple cups of flour here with just a little bit of seasoning salt. It's important to season that a little bit because it will absorb a lot of flavor. A couple eggs just scrambled up, and then some breadcrumbs. So I'll prep all those out, and then we'll talk about frying. Okay, my mac and cheese bites are all formed up. You can see it was a little tough to get them out of the mold, but now that they're all formed up, I'm going to put them through this 3-stage breading process. First thing is the flour with a little bit of seasoning salt, then egg, then breadcrumbs, and then they'll be ready to fry. When you're doing this, it's good to keep one hand dry, one hand wet. So when I'm going into the flour, I use my dry hand. When I'm going into the egg, use the wet hand. It just kind of keeps you from ending up with big cakes of breading on your hands. All right, so we're getting ready to fry the mac and cheese now. You can see I'm lucky enough to have this countertop fryer here that kind of does the heating and heat management for me. It's preheated to 325. If you don't have one of these, you can certainly do this stovetop in a big pot. A couple of safety things with frying, because obviously having this much hot oil inside your home can be dangerous. Be very careful not to overfill the fryer, okay? And keep in mind, when you first put in the oil, when it heats up, it will expand a little bit, and then when you actually throw your food in there, it'll create a lot of steam. It'll expand a lot more than you even realize. So, so if you're using a pot, fill it less than halfway full. Manage your heat, because if oil gets too hot, it will definitely catch on fire. So use a fry thermometer if you've got one, or just pay really close attention to it. In the event of an oil spill, or if it catches on fire, or if it's just getting too hot, do not put water on it, right? Oil and water don't mix. That's how water on a grease fire will create a bigger fire. So if you have a Class K extinguisher in your kitchen, that's ideal. Most of us don't. Next best would be an ABC type extinguisher. But again, some of us don't have that. So if you're doing stovetop frying, use a pot with a lid, okay? So throwing a lid on that and turn the heat off will work great. I have a built-in lid on mine, and we also have a good extinguisher system here in our kitchen, so we have all our bases covered. When in doubt, you can do this whole thing outside as well, just like when you're frying your Thanksgiving turkey. If you're using a pot method and you don't have a nice basket like mine, have nice long-handled tools, right? Obviously you don't want to burn yourself in the oil, and have a plan for what you're gonna do with your fried items once they come out. So what my plan is, I'm gonna let the oil drip out still in the basket, and then I'll go to this paper towel. A wire rack also works great if you prefer to use that. And right as they go in, I'm hearing them sizzle, I'm seeing them bubble. That's good. If you don't see that, your oil's not warm enough yet. All right, it's been about 4 or 5 minutes. The mac and cheese nice and golden brown. So I'll just kind of let the oil drain out before transferring onto my paper towel. And when these are still warm, you want to hit them with a little bit of extra salt on the outside so that it kind of sticks. You can use seasoning salt too if you like. So here's our version of fair scones with raspberry jam, our fried mac and cheese made from leftover mac and cheese, and our grilled street corn with chipotle crema. Thanks so much for joining us today for our Fair Food edition of Firehouse Cooking, and as always, your kitchen safety is our priority.
Very nice.